Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and I am reporting from Pepperworld headquarters. It's almost Halloween, and so I thought it would be a perfect time to be covering the Book of the Dead. Actually, the death rites not only of the ancient Egyptians, but also the Tibetan death rites and the Yoruba death rites. I say this in every episode and I will say it again. I am just a guy doing my own research online. I think it's very important as English speakers that we recognize that the information that we can get online is not always fully reliable. It's often translated and or recorded by people who have engaged in genocide or cultural erasure. So, as I'm reporting on this, I want to hear from you. If you know more about this than me, if you grew up in a household studying or practicing these things, I want to hear from you. This truly is about building a community and finding other people interested in these things, but also who grew up learning, experiencing, practicing all kinds of things. Maybe you just had a past life doing this shit. I don't know. You tell me. But I would love to get into it. It is Scorpio season, and they say that the veil is thinnest between the world of the living and the world of the dead during Scorpio season. And believe you me, I really feel that. If you don't know, I think I've talked about it in a few episodes, but I do talk to ghosts sometimes. I've seen ghosts a few times in my life. I've talked to ghosts and spirits, and the spirit world is fucking real, let me tell you. And what I think is so interesting about like modernized, westernized human society is our lack of belief in the spirit world, and yet deep down we know it exists. And let me explain what I mean. Like, I feel like the Western world doesn't believe in ghosts, right? And it doesn't believe in spirits. But yet there is still a fear of like dark magic. There is a fear of like worship of dark things. And I think deep down we all know the spirit world is real because it is. Like, we all have experienced chaos magic. We've all met someone who was doing some dark shit with their energy, and like we felt that in our body. Like, it does not feel good. It's terrifying. And yeah, I think what's happened, unsurprisingly, is there's just so much residual propaganda from medieval Europe, so much condemnation of anything pagan, anything that predated Christianity became demonized, and then everything became scary. And I think there's so much fear that comes around what the spirit world is, what magic is. Anything outside of our understanding becomes feared. And I've just been thinking about that a lot recently. Um, I've been thinking about how I know so many people who don't believe in the spirit world, but yet they also fear it. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy. And I think it's also very telling of where humanity is right now. There's a lot of denial. If you fear something, you deny that it exists. That's often the mentality. There's a denial and a level of fear around a lot of things. And I find that to be really it really holds us back. Humanity has been so held back by our shared fears. So, let's talk about some of the death rites and beliefs in death of some of these ancient cultures. And I'm really excited to talk about this because I do believe that our souls, our spirits, live infinitely. Yes, our bodies may only live for a number of years, but our souls live on forever. And I do believe that the day we are born and the day that we die are some of the most important days of our life. And sadly, because the Western world is so terrified of the spirit world and so terrified of death, I find that in the Western world, many people have unfulfilling and sad deaths. And I'm fascinated to know more about how some cultures hold space for dying, hold space for death, and what they believe a spirit does after death. Do you believe in love after life? Life after love? No, I said it wrong. You get what I'm saying. Okay, so let us begin with arguably the most famous. This is commonly known as the Book of the Dead of the ancient Egyptians. Interestingly, the Book of the Dead of ancient Egypt is actually directly translated from the ancient Egyptian language. It directly translates to the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Hold on, let's move my computer a little bit. That's better. Okay, so the Egyptian Book of the Dead evolved from earlier pyramid texts that were written in the Old Kingdom. Okay, so this would have been in the around 2400 BC. That's a long time ago. This is over 4,000 years ago. And an amalgamation of the coffin texts, which were from the Middle Kingdom around 2,000 years ago, give or take. So basically, this is like amalgamation of like groups of works from the pyramid texts and the coffin texts. During the New Kingdom, which was around 1550 BC to 50 BC, the Book of the Dead was compiled, and they were considered spells that were copied onto papyrus scrolls or onto shrouds or onto tomb walls. So let's clear something up. One thing that I actually didn't realize is that the Egyptian Book of the Dead was written every time someone died. So if you were died and given a proper burial, then someone would actually write out the entire Book of the Dead for you. The idea being it would be with you so that you could use it after dying. Does this make sense? So sometimes they would really just write it on papyrus, or perhaps if it was like a fancier, wealthier person, they would write the entire Book of the Dead on the walls. I had this like idea. I guess when we think of book, I thought of it was like some book that people were reading. And this was something that was given to you after dying in your tomb. Interesting. And it was considered a collection of spells. Hmm. So, obviously, most people were just having papyrus scrolls left in their tomb. Like the people who were getting the whole fresco wall art situation would have been pharaohs, mega wealthy. So, most people are just getting papyrus scrolls where they get all of the incantations written out on these scrolls. And these would often be very personalized. You would have your name written on them, whoever died, and then they would often choose specific chapters that may appeal to you or you may need the most. And then they would also paint vignettes to like walk you through each step. Literally so cute. And these vignettes would usually be of like what landmarks you would visit in the underworld, known as duat. Underworld is duat. Okay. So most of the time, now granted, this is important to remember. The Book of the Dead was written for every dead person over the course of like 1,500 years. So sometimes there was differences in these texts. Granted, they were mostly like very similar, but obviously as they were like rewritten again and again and again and personalized for different people, there was some differences in them. However, most of the time they followed a very similar structure. So the first section would be the entry into the afterlife. This is when a person would literally be awakened in their tomb and they would reclaim their senses. And they would have spells written for this, like actual spells to evoke like a healthy and successful process. So this would be the first 16 spells. In total, there's 189 spells. So the first 16 are just you awakening and reclaiming your senses in the tomb. Then the second section, which is the spell 17 through 36, okay? Are you following? Second section is the journey through the underworld, Tuat. So this is when you'd pass through the gates, then you'd go through the lakes, you go through the serpents, and eventually meet the guardians of the underworld. Then the third section would be judgment and vindication. You would go through purity tests, and you would have the weighing of your heart by Maat. And there was also spells written for this, spells 64 through 129. Then there was the pinnacle, the apotheosis and transformation. Apotheosis is basically like the pinnacle or the climax. So this is like the height. This is like the grand finale. And this is when one becomes divine and they would be allowed to live in the field of reeds. So the ultimate goal of the afterlife was to be granted the right to stay in the underworld and to live forever in the field of reeds on the banks of the Nile. And this is so magical. It actually reminds me of one of my closest friends is Egyptian, and she was telling me about a vision she had where she was on the banks of the Nile in the tall grass and the reeds and sat at a banquet table with all of her ancestors. And it's just so magical. It's just so crazy that that is literally the goal of the afterlife, to be granted the pleasure to be able to live in the field of reeds with the ancestors. I know someone who's been there, just saying. So magical. Okay, so like I said, there are spells for each section. And these spells would be like wishes, almost like, yeah, like protection spells for you to successfully go through each of these sections, hopefully making it to the field of reeds. So, the key spells. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me reformat my notes. My notes are a little confusing. Give me 1 second. I do want to go through some of these spells because I think they're so fascinating. I won't read all 186, but I'm going to give you the gist of the spells. Okay, so basically the first two spells, as someone is becoming awakened in their tomb, these spells allow the soul to leave their tomb and travel freely. Often these spells begin with something like, I have come forth by day to see the sun god. Okay, and then as the spells go on, the sixth spell is called to open the mouth of the dead. This ensures that the body can eat, speak, and breathe. This mirrors the physical opening of the mouth ritual performed by priests. This, what they're referring to is as a body was being mummified and embalmed, they'd often open the mouth and like put things in it to allow them to come awake after dying. Okay, then the 15th spell and the 16th spell were hymns to the rising and setting sun. These spells identify the deceased with Ra's daily cycle of death and rebirth. The 17th spell is the theological declaration of unity. I am the great God who created himself. This is basically the philosophical creed of divine self-recognition. Then the 23rd through 26th spell is about the restoration of limbs. This guarantees that arms, legs, eyes, and heart work in the next world. These spells would often be illustrated with the deceased standing whole, being healthy and strong. So then some famous ones are the 30th spell, and they're often the 30th spell is divided often into two separate spells. And this is called the charm for the heart. These spells would be engraved on scarab amulets placed on the chest of the deceased. This would prevent the heart from testifying against its owner in judgment. So basically, part of the process after one died would that they would be confronted with the goddess Ma'at in the afterlife, and their heart would be set on a scale. And if it was heavier than a feather, then they would not be allowed to pass into the afterlife. The idea being that if you had committed atrocities, you would not be allowed in the afterlife. But it's so funny that they're putting this charm on so that your own heart doesn't rat you out. I think this is so hilarious. Then the 42nd spell is for repelling the crocodile. This is a protective formula against the dangerous beings in the duat, the crocodiles in the rivers and lakes of the underworld. There's also spells to avoid decapitation and drowning as you pass through the rivers and lakes. Interestingly, there's also a spell for becoming an Osiris. In this spell, it says, I am Osiris, my body will not perish. This is a core resurrection spell. In the myth of Osiris, he is killed and is resurrected, and eventually his body grows gardens. Plants grow from his body. So this spell really is about resurrection, but also becoming like having a new life, a new form. There's also spells about transforming into hawks, lotuses, and swallows. These spells enable metamorphosis into divine or free-moving forms, the lotus symbolizing rebirth, and the hawk symbolizing the flight of Ra. This stuff is so crazy. There's a lot of spells, but another spell I do want to mention is the spell of the chapter of the Field of Reeds. This spell is a description of paradise, fertile fields, canals, eternal harvests. The blessed plow reaps and feasts forever. Literally so sweet. This is just so sweet. And finally, the last spells, the ones that are kind of like the climax of this whole process, these spells join the souls with Ra. It proclaims, I am yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And with this last spell, the individual merges with cosmic time. They become a part of everything, everywhere, all at once. So essentially, there are 4 ritual and symbolic elements in the ancient Egyptian belief of the afterlife. So the first is the voice of power. This is the idea that reading or recitation activates magic, and silence equals spiritual paralysis. So part of why they wrote the Book of the Dead for each person is so that their soul could actually read it and speak it aloud to like allow these things to happen. Then there's also the name. This element is known as Ren in the ancient Egyptian language. And the idea of this is that your survival depends on remembrance. Erasing a name destroys that person. And then there's the heart, known as Ib. This is the seat of consciousness, not the brain. So in ancient Egypt, they believed that the heart was the seat of consciousness. And then there is the idea of the weighing. This was the weighing of the heart. And this kind of ties back in. The reason why your heart was weighed is because that was considered the seat of your consciousness. So this was about moral order. The goddess Ma'at is the goddess of cosmic law, and the judgment is both ethical and metaphysical. And then, of course, there's the transformation. Death is a series of initiations, and each gate equals a psychological threshold. It does seem like these layers of the afterlife do seem like the staircase of enlightenment. There's a lot of similarities I'm seeing here with the alchemical ideas and the ideas of the consciousness transforming and becoming free. Let's take a quick break. This is your friendly reminder from your friend Annabelle that you are incredible. You are one of a kind. There is only one of you in this whole planet. Therefore, all of the things within you, the things that you see as your weaknesses, the things that you see as your strengths, they're your superpowers because you're the only one of you. You are supposed to be here right now. You're in the perfect place at the perfect time. What if you just believed in yourself? Like you literally got this. This is your reminder. Drink your water. Take care of yourself. Put the work into yourself. What if you really believed in yourself and you went for it? Why not? You got this, bitch. I love learning about the death rites of ancient cultures. I think I'm so fascinated by the ancient world because I'm fascinated by the idea of being like a highly advanced and nuanced culture with things like infrastructure and irrigation and buildings and high rises and also believing in magic and spirituality. Like that concept is so alluring to me and fascinating because I was raised in fucking the Bay Area and like I just was raised in like a family and a culture that was so separated from the ancient world. And I just think it's so magical and unsurprising that almost every culture has these beliefs about the spirit's journey, the spirit's journey towards the source. This idea that us incarnating in a body is us being separated from the ultimate source, whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, love, like literally whatever the source is to you, fine. And incarnation is the separation process, and then death is like the reintegration. But to get there, you first have to like make amends with yourself. And I think that's basically what reincarnation is. Most people, especially because of the world we live in, are unfulfilled and sad and disappointed in themselves for not really fulfilling their needs. Their heart is heavy, which is the seat of their consciousness, according to the Egyptians. And because their heart is heavy, they have to reincarnate again to finish the job. My mind is blown. Also, I just did some Googling because I was realizing that, as we talked about earlier, the ancient Egyptian word for heart is ib, and it reminded me of the name Ibrahim. So I looked up if Rahim meant anything in the ancient Egyptian language, and it meant merciful. So the name Ibrahim would mean merciful heart. And just as a reminder, all of these ancient names in the Bible do come from Egypt because the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, and their language, the Kabbalah, all comes from Egyptian culture taught to them by Moses. Anyway, this my brain is just kind of going a mile a minute. Let's get back to it. Let's get back on topic. We talked about the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Egyptian death rites. Now I want to get into the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You guessed it. So, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is slightly different than the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The idea being that the Egyptian Book of the Dead would be written and given to a corpse for the corpse to read when they come back alive. Whereas the Tibetan Book of the Dead was not actually, it was usually recited either as someone was dying or right after they died. And this would help their soul figure out what to do as they were dying and transitioning. So it is believed that the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also known as the Bardo Todol Chenmo, and basically this translates into the great liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. It is believed that it was written by somebody known as Padmasambhava in the 8th century CE, current era. These peppers are popping off. I'm not sure. I did change the settings of my mic, so maybe you're not getting the barks anymore. I hope you're not hearing the barks, but let me tell you, these peppers are popping off. I've been really wanting to get a dog, you guys. I really want to get a dog. Could you imagine if I was just doing this podcast with like a little short-legged sausage boy on my lap? That's what I want. I want a short-legged sausage boy with spots. Okay. Enough of that. Back on track. So, the Tibetan Book of the Dead was written most likely in around the year 800, and this was recorded. It's sorry, I'm tripping over my words. Likely thought to have come from the brain of Padmasambhava, written by his consort Yeshe Tiskail. And this text was rediscovered in the 14th century. So it was written in the year 800 and then rediscovered in the 14th century. And this is part of a Tibetan tantric canon. And it was read aloud to a dying person or a corpse to help their consciousness recognize its own true nature and attain liberation instead of being reborn. So the idea being, if you hadn't reached enlightenment in your life, by reading this to someone as they had just died, you would kind of give them the opportunity to escape the reincarnation cycle, which is so nice. I think that is such a lovely thing to do. So there was essentially like 3 sections of the death process. The first was known as the Chikhai. And the Chikhai was like the first the first part. This was like the moment of dying. And this was when somebody would experience the clear light, the pure, formless awareness of consciousness. And the goal was to recognize the light as oneself, as instant enlightenment, which is fascinating because I feel like in like the Christian canon, they tell you like if you see the light, you go towards it. Whereas here, if you see the light, you're supposed to recognize it as yourself. Beautiful. Okay, then the second part is known as the choinid, and this is between the first 2 weeks after you die. So the first 14 days after death is this period. And this is when you experience the appearance of 42 peaceful and 58 wrathful deities. And these are the manifestations of your own mind. And the goal is to recognize all of these visions as your own projections. And if you can recognize them as your own projections, you reach liberation. And then the final phase is known as the Sidpa, and this happens between the 15th and 49th day. So this is after the second week, all the way up to 7 weeks, right? 49, 7 times 7 is 49. So this is the 3rd to 7th week after death. And this is when one experiencing the where one experiences the ripening of their karma. They get visions of sexual unions that draw them closer to a new womb. Oh, this gives me chills. This gives me total chills. I love this like concept too of like not only are you're being drawn to a new womb during the sexual union of the parents. And then the goal of this period is to retain your awareness and to choose a favorable rebirth, or if you choose to transcend. So it's really about choosing consciously and autonomously. And if you choose to reincarnate, to retain your awareness. As we all know, that is not an easy thing to do. It's like saying I'm going to remember my dream. Good luck. Also, like most of us don't remember who we really are or remember our past lives. So we can all attest that this is not easy to remember. So there are other, so these three sections of the Book of the Dead are like considered bardos. Like the first one I mentioned was the Chikai bardo. The second one was the Chioinid bardo, and the third one is the Sidpa bardo. And there are actually other bardos that refer to the waking life, these experiences with goals and whatnot. However, the Book of the Dead focuses on these three because these three have to do with after you die, just to be clear. So these are kind of like, I don't know, they're like assignments, they're like tasks. So I'm going to give you some details with these sequences. So during the first part, when one immediately dies, and this is the Chikai Barudo, they describe the physical elements around you dissolving. Earth, water, fire, air, and space dissolves around you. Your consciousness becomes formless. So it's not just your body, it's your consciousness becomes formless and away from all physical elements. Each dissolution is accompanied by inner signs, mirages, smoke, fireflies, flickering lamps. And finally, the clear light dawns. This is a radiant emptiness, considered the mother light. The guidance that is written here is do not fear. You are now experiencing the natural luminosity of your own mind. This is giving me chills. Okay, so then the instructions for the second part, the Choinid Bardo, this is like the first week after death, is when you'll experience the peaceful deities that will visit you, the 42 peaceful deities. So they will appear one per day from the 5 Buddha families. They're known as the Vairocana, which is symbolized by the color white, and they are the center. Then there's the Akshobhaya, which is the blue, symbolizing the east. There's the Ratna Sambhava, which is yellow, south. And then there's the Abita, which is red, west. Abita Bachchan. No, just kidding. And then there's the Amogashidi, which is green or the north. Basically, these are all peaceful deities from the 5 Buddha families, and they each radiate this light, this specific color of light, and they're all different versions of wisdom. And the soul is tempted by duller or basically duller, like less bright lights. And safer lights represent the samsaric realms, human, God, animal. So essentially, usually, if a soul hasn't reached enlightenment, they're more attracted to the lights that symbolize the physical world because they feel more normal, they feel safer. By choosing a brighter light, you are actually reaching liberation. And by choosing a dim light, you are choosing rebirth. Damn. Okay, so then for the last week is when you meet the wrathful deities. Okay, this is the, did I say the last week? The last week of this period. Sorry. So this is the second week after death, day 8 to 14 after death. This is when you meet the fierce forms of the same Buddhas. So you're not actually meeting like evil deities. They're just the fiercer faces of the same entities. They often have fangs and are surrounded by flames and skull garlands and terrifying screeches and cries. I think these are like probably some of the most famous Tibetan art pieces when you see those like demons that are like, they look hella metal and they're like floating through space and their like pussies are on fire and their faces are on fire. You know what I'm talking about. They're super sick. These represent the unintegrated aspects of your own mind. So, like anger, attachment, ignorance. Once you recognize them as projections of your own mind, they transform terror into bliss. And so, if you don't figure that out, if you reject those things, that's what leads you into the next phase. So you could just reach enlightenment right away, but if not, you go into the next phase, which is the Sidpa. This is days 15 through 49, week 3 through week 7 after death. This is when one experiences hallucinations of pursuit, judgment, storms, or being pushed by the winds of karma. This is when the Lord of Death may appear, weighing black and white pebbles, which is the idea of weighing your merit versus your sins. Um, and the consciousness of this person will see couples in a sexual union. An attraction or aversion determines the species and sex of the next birth. Fascinating. So, meditation or mantra remembrance, such as the most famous Om Mani Padme Hum, can redirect awareness to liberation even here. So basically, each of these steps, you have the opportunity to reach enlightenment. And if you don't, then you'll go into the next, and you have the opportunity to reach enlightenment. If you don't, you go into the next. And so fascinatingly, whatever you're attracted to seems like is where you go. If you're attracted to these like demons, or you kind of give into them, then you go into the next phase. If you're attracted to these couples having sex, you'll be their baby. Like, this is so crazy. But even here, if you could stay with your meditations, oh, Mare Padme Hum, you can make it. So, I find this so fascinating and so helpful. And this is one thing I love about Eastern practices and Eastern religion. This idea of mantra and meditation is designed so that it carries with you in your waking life, in your dream life, and in the afterlife. This idea of focus and centeredness is really the main lesson, so that eventually, when you are traveling through the multiverse, you can keep your centeredness and not go crazy, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried hallucinogens, but I just feel like hallucinogens are like the best. If you're afraid of death, you should take some hallucinogens so that you can get some practice. It's like the same idea. You're thrust into the spirit world and you either freak out or you have a good time. And I feel like if you have a good time, you have nothing to, you don't fear death, because it just kind of means that, like, no matter where you are in the living world, in the spirit world, in the death world, it's kind of up to you, the vibe. And I feel like that's like the base bone of all Eastern modalities. You know what I'm saying? It's like they were basically meditating to the point of doing drugs. I don't know if you're not watching this on YouTube, you can't tell, but I just burned so much Palo Santo, and now I'm burning sage. I just can't get enough. Talking about all this death, I swear that I can feel spirits around me right now. I feel like they're like listening in, like it's story time. They're like, tell us about how we move on. Can you help? I can like feel so many spirits right now. Also, I don't know about you. I've been so exhausted during the Scorpio season and the end of Libra season, and I feel like I forget this every year. I get so tired this time of year, and I think it's because I actually I really do like sense spirits and talk to spirits, and I feel like during this time there's so many, and I just get overwhelmed, and I just sleep. But I'm just like I'm pouring one out for the homies, if you will. I'm smoking my homies out, if you will. Love you guys. Okay, so back to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So the protocol is, if someone was to die in this practice, a lama or a family member would read these texts aloud daily for the 49 days, which I think is so nice. They're basically like giving 49 days, that's 7 weeks of instruction to the dead. Lovely. They would often make offerings of butter lamps, incense, water bowls, and food. This is so fucking nice. Are you kidding me? I could cry. Um, Also during this time, people would leave out visual aids. They would have drawings of the 100 deities or mandalas, or even images of the Buddha of compassion that they would leave out for their deceased loved ones, that they could like use as resources. And this is actually, I think, very similar to the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The idea of like leaving these resources out for the dead to use. This is so thoughtful. So, in a nutshell, the five philosophical themes of the Book of the Dead is the mind-only cosmology, the idea that everything seen after death is one's own projection, which I think is accurate. Then there's also fear as ignorance, the idea that liberation comes through recognition and not from being rescued. The idea that basically fear is the only thing you need to save yourself from. Then there's the idea of the continuity of awareness. Meditation in life trains the recognition in death. Keeping your centeredness and awareness is like the core principle of all of this. And of course, compassion. Prayers for the dead generate merit, aiding their clarity. And then there's really about the magnetic pull of attraction. If you are attracted to enlightenment, you will receive enlightenment. And by being attracted to the physical world, you go there. It's actually really about choosing your path, choosing your destiny. Let's take a break. Esoterica and Nonsense wants to hear from you. We have listener episodes coming, and I want to tell your story. Maybe you've had a really freaky dream. Maybe you had some crazy religious experience. Maybe you grew up in a cult. Maybe you actually just have some random stories that your grandma used to tell you growing up. Maybe you just want to share something random with me. The floodgates are open. Please email in your story at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. Any story that comes to your mind, I want to hear it, even if you just want to say hi. We love that. We are all for it. And get ready for some listener episodes coming soon. I'm so pleased. I'm honestly really touched by these books of the dead. I'm so I just find them to be so sweet and so genuine and so thoughtful. This idea of that after somebody dies, that you are speaking to them and guiding them and helping them find peace. I just think it's so lovely and so compassionate and so thoughtful. And I just love this idea, especially like I think it's really focused upon in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. This idea that it's whatever you choose. Like if you are not ready or not capable and like you choose to reincarnate, then great. Like it's not a condemnation, it's not hell, or even just the idea that like you choosing a hard life, it just might be a conscious choice. It could be subconscious, but it's like it's still your choice. Things aren't punishments or rewards. They're just like your ability to focus on something. And I think that's so accurate. I mean, again, I'm relating this back to psychedelics, but like a bad trip isn't a punishment. A bad trip is like basically when you let your fears go out of control and then it just becomes like a nightmare. Yeah, it's like the dream world. We've all had nightmares. Nightmares are when your fears just go a little crazy. But if you can calm your fears down, you can change your nightmare into a lovely dream. And I love this sentiment for the afterlife. I love this sentiment as an allegory for consciousness in general. I just think this is so lovely. Okay, so last but not least, I do also want to touch on the teachings and death protocols of the Yoruba tradition, which are known as the Ifa teachings. Now, just to be clear, I'm a guy researching my stuff online, so let's take everything I say with a grain of salt. It is nowhere as good as learning from the source. Okay. And I find, and the Yoruba tradition is particularly hard to research because so much of it is an oral tradition. It comes from West Africa and has since then spread all throughout the Americas, specifically the Caribbean and South America. So I just want to be clear that what I'm reporting is generalized and may or may not be mega accurate. And also for people who practice, like they could have their own versions, so on and so forth. This is an oral tradition. Okay? This sage smoke is so lovely. I can't get enough. Okay. So, in the Yoruba teachings, Ifa is the death protocols, okay? And this is made up into a framework of two intertwined realms known as Aye and Orun. Aye is the visible world, the material world. And Orun is the spiritual world, the world of the ancestors and the world of the divine entities. So vital energy, known as Ase or Ashe, flows between the two realms. You get me? The energy of life flows between the physical realm and the spirit realm. And ritual and ritual ceremony keeps them balanced. So the idea of like any kind of ritual is to keep this energy that flows between realms balanced. Okay. So let's like really quick go through some anatomy in the Yoruba tradition. So there is the ori. The ori is known as the spiritual destiny, which is chosen before birth. So this is like your North Star. This is where you're headed. Okay, your North Node, if you will. Then there is the Emi. The Emi is the breath of life. This is the divine spark from the mega source, which is often known as the Oludumare. Okay, Emi is the breath of life. Then we have Okan. Okan is the heart or emotional soul. And I find this really interesting. The idea of the breath of life, which is like given to you from the source, but then there's also your emotional soul. As in there's a kind of a difference between like your soul and like the life, the breath of life within you. I think they're onto something here. I think this is accurate. And then there is the ara, which is the physical body, your temporary vessel. Okay? Some vocab. And we'll come back to this. So, according to the Yoruba tradition, this is the journey of the dead. There's first the separation. So, the emi, which is your breath of life, leaves the body and it's escorted by a guardian, an orisha. Orishas are the deities of the Yoruba tradition. I think obviously the most famous is Oshun and Yemaya, but there are countless deities and they often are elemental spirits, spirits of water, of land, of rivers. So they're kind of like uh, land. What's the word I'm looking for? What is it called when like spirits occupy land? They're mystical deities, okay? Guardians. They will escort your breath of life from your body. Okay, then after that, there is the judgment before Olodumare. And like I said earlier, the Olodumare is basically are the Western ideas of God, the creator of consciousness and of life. So there's a judgment before the creator. Your destiny is reviewed, and if you are of good character, you are rewarded. Then you are allowed entrance into the Orun Rere, which is good heaven, or the Orun Apadi, which means the heaven of the potsherds, which is the realm of disorder. Basically, you're put into the realm of disorder or into good heaven. But interestingly, they're both known as heavens. There's like a chaos heaven and a good heaven, which I think is an interesting distinction. Then the next step is there's an integration into Egungun, and this is the ancestral collective. You have like, which I think is so lovely. It's kind of reminding me of like the first day of school. Like you have orientation back into the ancestor collective. And then the last step is you have the possibility of Atunwa, which is reincarnation. And this is interestingly, if your destiny is unfinished, you will reincarnate within your own lineage. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Oh my gosh, that is so fascinating. I have so many more questions. Like if you did fulfill your destiny, because then you like incarnate into anyone. But if you don't fulfill your destiny, you have to incarnate in your own lineage. This is fascinating. Oh my gosh. So part of the ritual protocols are the announcement and preparation of the body. So after somebody dies, their body is washed with sacred herbs, white cloths, and palm oil, and chalk is applied to their body. Afterwards, they have a divination. So often the priests or priestesses would consult the oral tradition to learn of the soul's status and to prescribe offerings. Eventually, the family would decide on where to bury the body, and it was the body should be buried on family land to maintain the ancestral link with that body. And then after, there would be a libation. They would often drink water or gin, and they would pour it in the earth to summon and honor the ancestors. They would literally pour it out for the homies. This is an ancient practice. And like literally, like this needs to be said. There is so much culture in the Americas, and I guess specifically I'm speaking about the United States because this is where I grew up, but there is so many things that we in the United States do that don't realize come from our ancestors. So in this particular example, this idea that we see in the movies or we hear in the songs or we see our friends pouring one out for the homies, like this actually comes from African culture of actually pouring a drink in the soil for your recently deceased family members or friends. And like that is just, this is just so deep and like we don't even realize it. This is like a stupid example, but another example is that recently I was talking with a friend and this phrase came up, a coon's age. And I was like, where the fuck does this phrase come from? And so I looked it up. And basically, in the United States, years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, they believed that raccoons lived for a long time. So they just started saying a coon's age. But actually, it's deeper than that. It was because this is a super ancient phrase from Ireland and the UK, from the Celtic tradition, where they would say a crow's age because they believed that crows were supernatural and basically were portals into other dimensions. So a crow's age was like an eternity. And then once people came to the Americas, a coon's age was like a play on words. It was just like they just redid the phrase. And anyway, my point is there are so many things that we do that we don't even realize come from ancient magical traditions. And I just think it's so important. Like this is why I wish more of us ask questions like why do we do these things? Why do we say these things? Like these come from thousands and thousands and thousands year old traditions. And I think that is so magical and so special that we are so connected with our ancestors without even knowing. You know what I'm saying? Like, how crazy is that? How crazy is it that even though you might speak a language that your ancestors weren't speaking, you might be saying jokes or saying profound things or even just a silly phrase that actually your ancestors could have said thousands of years ago and just not realize it? Ugh. Okay, anyway. So, after you would bury someone, after you'd pour some out for them, then there would often be a feast. And during this feast, there would be music, there would be drumming, and there would be songs praising that person and inviting their spirit to a peaceful transition. And then there would be the festival of the ancestors. People would wear masks and they would dance and they would embody the ancestors. They would be making blessings and delivering corrections onto the community. They'd be asking the ancestors for corrections onto the community. And then for the following days and weeks, people would leave offerings for the recently deceased and the ancestors. They would often leave yam, schnapps, and what was known as the kola nut. And this was to maintain a connection with the ancestors across realms. Oh, this is just so nice. So, basically, the idea being that if somebody has good character after they pass, that is their right to enter the Orunrere, which is like the good heaven. Also, another interesting idea of this tradition is the idea that memory sustains existence. By by keeping a memory of someone, you keep them alive. And this actually does remind me of the Egyptian idea that if your name is erased, your soul is erased. This is kind of similar. They believe that by forgetting an ancestor, your ancestor dies a second death. This is definitely very similar. Another interesting philosophical principle is the idea of balance, that life and death are complementary phases of the same cycle. The harmony of Ashe keeps the cosmos stable. Because remember, I was saying earlier, the belief that there is the physical world and the spirit world, and the energy of life is flowing between them endlessly, like a double helix. And then finally, the idea of that destiny and freedom, the idea that each soul chooses its body and chooses its destiny, but it must live wisely through ethical action. I also just like this idea that every body chooses its destiny, but it's up to you to fulfill that destiny. That's real as shit. That's super fucking real. So, ultimately, what is my biggest takeaway from this? Well, I would love to hear your biggest takeaway, but my biggest takeaway is about love. The idea that if somebody is to pass, you recognize that their soul is still very much alive and that you want the best for them. You want them to be free, you want them to be happy, and you want them to be able to make autonomous choices. I feel like this is the biggest theme I've noticed from all three of these cultures is that you autonomously choose what you want. And with the right focus in life and in the right focus after death, you can choose freedom. And that's like the ultimate goal. And I think this is so special. I just think this is so special. I'm I'm truly touched by these accounts, and it's actually kind of like putting me in a really reflective headspace, like this idea that if you forget your ancestors, they die a second death. Like, I don't really know anything about my ancestors. Like, I know a little bit about some of my great grandparents, and I've heard stories about my great great grandparents, but like not like only tidbits. But like, I have beyond that, like, I have no idea who my ancestors really were. And this idea that in so many ancient cultures, they would tell stories of their ancestors. They would actually tell stories of people or even just their cultures, and they'd keep these stories alive. I think that is the greatest gift of an oral tradition, is to actually keep stories within your family, to keep stories within your village or your town of your people, what they were doing, what they believed in, what they were thinking of. That is so magical and it's so special. And I think that's what has made me feel the most disappointed with the culture that we have built in the Western world, is just how disposable everything is. Things are created and they fall within the same few years. Things just are created and erased and created and erased. And it seems like by colonizing the world and by burning books and erasing others' histories, we've kind of become addicted to that behavior. We erase our own history, we erase our own culture. You know, like most young people I know haven't even seen movies from the 1980s, let alone earlier. Like we don't, we're just always looking for the next thing, and in doing so we're not present. We're not present in the moment, and we have no knowledge of the past. And if you ask me, consciousness and life is like a drug trip. It never ends. And it really is your autonomous decision if it gets dark or if it gets exciting and bright. Your mind and your beliefs are shaping reality. And ideally, with a little bit more community and more help, we can help each other find ways to navigate life. We can help each other find ways to not turn this into a bad trip. And this is what is so touching to me and beautiful about the ancient world, is that it seems like so much of the ancient world was based around helping each other, not just each other's bodies, but helping each other's souls find peace and find liberation across time and space. That is so beautiful. And that's my ultimate wish. My ultimate wish is that all conscious things can find peace now. I wish that all conscious beings can find peace and centeredness whenever they decide. And it would be amazing if that was now. I really do wish that for all of us. There is no need for us to be experiencing pain and misery. We can just choose kindness and compassion for ourselves. And when we do that, we can create paradise here on earth. And I wish that for you, dear listener, whoever may be listening. Maybe it's a human, maybe it's a cat, maybe it's a dog, maybe it's the birds in the trees overhearing. Whoever's listening, I send you nothing but good wishes. I send you nothing but blessings. And may you have so much fun navigating time and space in this life and the next. I appreciate you so much for listening. We need more kind and fun and curious individuals here on planet Earth. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the next time. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful spooky season. Besitos.